Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Today we're talking about the unit that you just love to hate, Flying Cavalry. If there's one thing I'm known for in Call of Dragons, it's for being one of those degenerate Flying Cav players. I've been an Eagle main player since the third season when Frondel was first released, and I've focused on them just about every season since then. This video will be a complete guide to Flying Cav in Call of Dragons. We'll start with a brief overview of their strengths and weaknesses, then we'll go into discussion of their optimal employment during war. We'll discuss heroes, and I'll share my talent trees, and we'll discuss what artifacts and pets to use. Finally, we'll close on their current state and what I think their future is in Call of Dragons. So sit back, relax, as we discuss everyone's favorite unit to hate, Flying Cavalry. Now, Eagles are the flying unit for your Spring Warden faction. Those are your elves or treants. The Spring Wardens are kind of an interesting faction in that their ground cav does not perform like traditional ground cav, the same as the orcs and the humans do. Their ground cav is a ranged unit. It attacks at near range. Near range is about half the range of an archer, so it is pretty close, but it is still farther than melee. But their Eagles, however, do perform like standard cav, like the same as the cav for the orcs or the humans. You don't have to use Eagles with flying marches. You can use them as ground cav. You can send them with an Emrys March or whatever, and they'll function exactly like Knights or Wolf Riders, right? They'll get the charge off if they go after a ranged unit, and they have the same unyielding rush buff. Eagles, assuming the equivalent tier, assuming the equivalent technology, etc., are weaker than their orc or human counterparts. So while you can use them as ground cav, you're operating at a disadvantage if you do that. Eagles are really designed to maximize their maneuverability at the cost of their power. So how do you use Eagles in battle? Well, their primary purpose is really to hit the refill line or the back line of your enemy formations, right? In the middle of a big battle, you send your Eagles either to get the reinforcements that are heading towards the front line or the wounded troops that are trying to get back to their own city. You're really focusing on the ranged marches, the mages and the archers, to take them out, to kill them. And particularly during a big battle, players will often have several marches at the front while others are either retreating back to their home city or coming to the home city, so they're not being focused on. Eagles can really hit those marches and hit them fast. The other thing that Eagles are great at is hunting down those pesky flying marches. Mostly Celestials, every so often Wyvern Riders. And there are a few reasons why they're so good at hunting those units down. They're ranged marches, so when you go against them, you're going to get your unyielding rush, you're going to get that instant rage cycle. That's great. The second reason is your Eagles are faster, usually a lot faster. But that really brings me to the third reason. How do flying marches get away? Flying marches cannot retreat into a friendly city. They can only retreat back to their original home city, or they can also move into a keep. Often you'll find situations where flying units get too far out on a limb, and you can use your Eagles to chase them down and finish them off. The next thing we should talk about is the Forest Eagle's special ability, which is called Eagle Strike. And the thing that Eagle Strike does is it gives your march a 10% damage boost, which is pretty strong, but it only takes effect according to the tooltip if there's no other friendly legions within range of your legion. When this first came out, I was pretty disappointed. I almost always send out multiple Eagle marches, and so I thought, hey, this is literally never going to do anything for me. However, this tooltip's a little misleading. The way this works is if you send out multiple Eagle marches, whichever one hits first is going to get this buff. The subsequent marches will not get the buff, but they won't remove it from the first march, right? So if you have, let's say, 3 marches hitting, and they all hit almost simultaneously, whichever one wins the race gets the buff and keeps the buff for the entire combat. So it is useful, but you want to try and fix it so your strongest marches are going to hit first. Okay, so let's talk about the heroes we're going to use with the flying cav marches. So right now there's only 6 heroes in the game that fly. You see all 6 of them right here. So it means at best you can do 3 full marches of flying eagles. Okay, now first up we got Frondel, and he's the only hero in the game designed specifically to work with a flying cav march. All 5 of his skills work, and they're all in plan for what you want to do with flying cavalry. Now it is worth noting that his rage skill does a damage factor of only 1200, which is low for a cavalry commander. The G1 legendary cav commanders both have a damage factor of 1500, And the G3 heroes go all the way up to 1600. I think this is another good example of sacrificing strength in exchange for mobility. Next up we got Thea. Now all of her skills work, so she's a 5 out of 5 in that respect. But unlike Ferondel, her skills are a little bit more defensive focused. And really when we're talking about flying cav, what do you want to do? Like we discussed, you want to find that vulnerable march, hit hard, hit fast, and then get out. And Thea doesn't help you with that the same extent that a Ferondel helps you with that. Still, other than Ferondel, she's your commander most suited to leading Flying Eagles. Now next up we got Freygar. Of her 5 skills, 4 of them work, including the Rage skill. Now her third skill, Storm Barrage, only applies to archers, so it's not going to do anything when you're flying with eagles. Everything else works. Now one of the downsides with her is her skills do tend to favor normal attack damage, which makes sense, she's an archer commander. But obviously with Cavalry, you'd rather they focus on skill damage instead of normal attack damage. In addition, her Rage skill only has a damage factor of 800, and it only even gets up to 800 when you awaken her. Once again, that makes sense given she's an archer commander, but it's just another example of the trade-off you're going to have to make when you want to fly eagles. Alright, next up we got Craig. Now Craig's an epic hero, but he performs really more like a legendary when he's leading the Flying Cav March. 4 out of his 5 skills work, and the only one that doesn't work is his 4th skill, and that's because it's an engineering skill. So obviously that's not providing any combat value regardless of the march you would be involved with. His Rage skill is very strong, particularly when awakened. It does AoE damage, and it can do even more damage than Ferondel's does. Okay, things are getting a little bleaker now with Atheus. Atheus has 4 of his 5 skills active, but that kind of oversells it, right? His first skill, his Rage skill, that's Smite. It's based on magic damage, so that's completely ineffective with Flying Cav. His second skill generates raids. It's a rage machine. But we already know that his rage skill is doing nothing, so depending on which hero you pair him with, at best you're only getting half value from his second skill. Now his remaining 3 skills, now you get March Speed here. March Speed's great. But for the most part, these are focused on hit points or damage reduction or more healing, right? Well, there's nothing wrong with damage reduction or having more hit points or getting healing, but it's not really on plan for your Flying Cav March. So he gets a 4 out of 5, but it's kind of a weak 4 out of 5. Okay, now we're in truly brutal territory with Bertrand. His first skill is magic based, so that's completely ineffective with Flying Cav. His second skill enhances hero skill damage, so it's completely ineffective with him, and it's probably not doing anything for his paired hero either. Right? The third skill only affects magic units, so that's completely useless. Now the fourth skill, which gives his legion 15% attack and defense, if they haven't taken normal damage for 3 seconds, that does work, assuming his march isn't being targeted. Now your marches are going to get targeted, but if you have 3 in the field, it's possible his march isn't getting targeted, so okay, let's give him that one. And then the awakened skill just makes the rage skill better. Bert's a 1 out of 5, and even that 1's not going to work all the time. So now that we've gone over each of the heroes, let's discuss who we're going to use as the primary commanders for each of our marches. The first primary for me is easy. It's Ferondel. He's designed specifically for Flying Cav, and his talents work great. And with him, paired with him, I have Craig. Now Ferondel's build focuses on skill damage, and Craig does the highest skill damage of any of my options here. Craig also synergizes well, both with my pet and my artifact, but we'll talk more about those later on. The second primary choice for me is Thea, and I have her paired with Freygar. Now Thea has the overall PvP and support trees, all of which work decently with Flying Cav, and they give you a lot of options to get to your march speed goals. Thea also boosts rage skill damage, and at least Freygar gives me a bit of synergy with that as well. Finally, we've got Atheus and Bert. This is easily the weakest of my 3 pairs. Their rage skills get 0% effectiveness. I get 0 value from Atheus's added rage generation, etc. I still find it useful to bring out the additional march for the added weight. You know, they get their artifact skill off, which is very helpful, etc. Now with these 3 pairings, you'll notice I've split up the movement speed boosts. Each pairing gets one hero that with their skills is boosting movement speed. If you don't have one of the movement speed heroes within one of your pairings, for example, let's say you have a Freygar Bert march, it becomes really difficult to get to your target march speed, which means that I would either have to make my marches slower, and I don't like that at all, or I'd have to compensate by giving one of them a march speed artifact. Now what about the other leads? Well, let's go through them. Well, Bert runs the skills tree, which doesn't have a ton of great stuff for a march that doesn't do any skill damage. He runs the magic tree, which is filled with talents that won't work for non-magic units. And he runs the PvP tree, which does work, but is just okay, and he doesn't have any other options. Well, how about Freygar? Well, Freygar's kind of the same story. Two of her trees, the marksman tree and the peacekeeping tree, are filled with talents that will literally do nothing for your Eagle's March. Right now that I'm in Home Kingdom, I'm actually in playing around with her as the primary, putting almost all her points in the mobility tree. I'll see if I can get it to work. It's basically the same story with Craig, who runs the engineering and marksman trees. Engineering's a little better because the entry-level talent isn't literally worthless, so you can grab that and then get the speed boost. But there's nothing worthwhile as you go deeper into these trees, so I don't really recommend Craig either. So these are the three pairs that I run: Ferondil with Craig, Thea with Freygar, and Atheist with Bert, along with their talent trees. Okay, let's talk about artifacts. For the most part, you're going to want to use the big AoE damage cav artifacts. Doing quick, big burst damage is exactly what you want. And the first one we'll talk about is the most straightforward. It's the Kingslayer. This artifact's been in the game since day one. It's available from the artifacts chests. It's got a great damage factor at 3600 when you max it out. A solid choice. Alright, next up is Sorlin's Blade. And the reason you might strongly consider Sorlin's is that it boosts your Legion's March speed by up to 18% when you've got it maxed out. And obviously that can help you achieve a March speed goal. So what are the trade-offs? Well, first, the damage factor is a little bit lower at only 3200. That's still really solid though. Sorlin's hits a max of 2 legions. That's a little low. For example, Kingslayer can hit up to 5. And you also pay for the March speed by losing a little legion attack bonus. But otherwise, this is really still a solid choice. Okay, things are going to get a little bit more complicated with the Spring Blades. And this tooltip's a little misleading. With the Spring Blades, you get 2000 damage factor on your initial throw, 400 damage factor on the hover, and that's 400 damage factor per second for 5 seconds, and then another 2000 damage factor on the return. All right, one of my strongest pieces of advice is never do public math, but I'm pretty sure that adds up to a total of 6000 damage factor. It hits up to 3 legions, and the stat boosts on Spring Blades are exactly what you want for your Flying Eagles. All of these things work perfectly with all your flying marches. Spring Blades also has an additional effect which gives you a keen boost plus 30% attack for 5 seconds every time your Legion triggers Passion. Alright, now Passion is a rage generation buff, and only the G1 Cav heroes, Emrys, Bakshi, and Alistar, can trigger Passion. Sadly, none of those heroes fly, so there's no way for your flying heroes to get this bonus. Still, Spring Blades is very strong, and I do recommend it for your flying marches. The last big burst damage artifact we'll talk about is the Wolfhowl Horn. This does a 4400 damage factor to hitting up to 3 units. It also inflicts a tremble effect, which stops units from moving, launching normal attacks, or casting rage skills, basically doing anything except counterattacks. The stats on the Wolfhowl Horn are okay. You have Cav unit attack, which is great, but then you also have Legion defense, which is okay, but you'd rather have attack there. Now the Wolfhowl Horn also has an additional effect that causes a bleed damage to targeted legions whenever your commander launches a rage attack. The bleed has a 600 damage factor per second for 3 seconds, and it's a passive effect with a long cooldown and can only be triggered once every 90 seconds. This bonus effect, however, only works if your commander is a Cav commander and the only flying hero qualifies as Frondil. If you have a Cav commander who hits multiple targets with their rage skill, this would trigger the bleed effect on all of them. Sadly, there are no flying commanders who do this. Okay, a couple of oddball artifacts worth considering. The first being the Vicious of the Sanctus, the artifact specifically designed for Thea. Now, Vicious does a couple of things. The first, its cooldown effect gives a legion 3 consecutive shields with a shield factor of 1800 each. The shield doesn't have to be placed on Thea or your whatever legion has this artifact. It can be placed on any friendly legion. Second, anytime your legion grants a shield via the artifact, via a hero skill, a pet talent, whatever, you get a stack of Mark of Judgment. Whenever you cast a rage skill, either your primary or your deputy, you'll do additional damage to the target legion, 500 damage factor per mark per stack of mark that you got. The other oddball artifact is the Oath of Stormpeak. This will summon a clone of your legion that fights for 10 seconds and then disappears. The clone will do whatever damage it does for 10 seconds, and when you summon it, it triggers an immediate rage cycle, assuming that it's a Cav March. When you summon it, it'll split your legion in two, so the enemy won't know what your real legion is and which is the clone, and if you get lucky, they'll target the clone instead of your actual legion. The Oath has an additional effect. Whenever you inflict cowardice on an enemy legion, you gain the Rampage buff, which gives you a 10% damage bonus for 10 seconds. Sadly, the only hero in the game that inflicts cowardice is Frondil, so if you want to get this bonus, it's got to be Frondil you use it on. The last two artifacts I want to talk about briefly are the Storm Arrows and the Wolfwoman of Halor, and I've seen Flying Cav use these artifacts from time to time. These are the Blink artifacts. They can be very powerful with ground Cav, but their ability is mostly wasted on Flying Cav. The fact that you fly enables you to basically ignore terrain anyway. Now, sure, there are some stat bonuses on these two, but I think they're poor choices for Eagles and I don't recommend them. Okay, so what do I use with my marches? Well, I experiment from time to time, but I tend to go with the Oath of Stormpeak with my Ferandal Craig, the Wolf Howlhorn with my Atheist Burt, and the Spring Blades with my Thea Fregar. Of course, what you use will be based on what artifacts you've unlocked and how far you've leveled them up. And frankly, there are more strong choices with artifacts than you have commanders to wield them. Okay, so let's talk about war pets. Unlike artifacts, in which you have a lot of strong choices, the war pet field is very limited. And this might be obvious, but just in case you didn't know, in order for your march to fly, not only do the troops need to fly, the commander and the deputy need to fly, but the war pet needs to fly as well. That means all your bear war pets and all your lizard war pets can be immediately ruled out. The Manticore family, despite having wings, can't fly either, so they're out. That only leaves the Phaedrake family and the Rock family. Now with these pets, we can rule a couple of them out very quickly. The Sapphire Phaedrake does magic damage, that's all it does. Your Legion does no magic damage. The Sapphire Phaedrake will literally do nothing. That's an easy cross off. The Seraphic and the Shadow Phaedrake both have two effects, one of which is a magic damage, that'll do nothing. But they also have a secondary effect that actually will work. The Seraphic does a little bit of healing, that's whatever, it's a very small amount, it's not really on plan, let's cross out the Seraphic. The Shadow is at least a little bit worth more thinking about. The Shadow Phaedrake will inflict a captive debuff on your target, which will cause your Legion to do additional damage to your target. That will work. I mean, doing damage to your target is on plan. I don't think it's great. It's worth thinking about, but I think you want other pets instead. Okay, we've ruled out 3 of the Phaedrakes. What about the 4th Phaedrake, the Berserk Phaedrake? Hey, this one's pretty good. In fact, it's specifically designed to work with Ferandil. The Berserk wants to put debuffs on enemy legions, especially the Cowardice debuff. Only Ferandil puts the Cowardice debuff on anyone, and he also has the Control Tree, which is a great source for additional debuffs, so it works great with him. Do any other hero skills give you debuffs? Yeah, Craig's Rage skill puts a bleed effect, potentially on multiple marches. This counts as a debuff effect. In addition, Fregar's 4th skill gives her normal attacks a chance to inflict a debuff on the enemy. That will help. Now, both of these heroes can serve as a good deputy for Frondil, but they really can support the Berserk all by themselves. The best you're going to do is Breachblade, which is the top of the PvP tree. Both Burt and Atheist have that. That's only 1 debuff every 30 seconds. At the end of the day, the Berserk is great for Frondil and pretty poor for everyone else. Okay, what about the Snowpeak Rock? The Snowpeak cares about 1 debuff in particular, Defense Break. Frondil can do that, but his synergy with the Berserk is just so much stronger. As I just mentioned, Atheist and Bertrand can do that as well, but only once every 30 seconds. So this one isn't really great for them either, but honestly, it may just be your best option if you have Atheist or Burt leading a march. Okay, well let's talk about the Golden Rock. The Golden Rock has a dual talent. When it triggers, it checks if your march has the Passion buff. If it doesn't, it gives your march the Passion buff, which gives your march some additional rage generation. If you've already got the buff, then the Golden Rock will do damage to the enemy march instead. Well, none of your flying heroes can trigger passion, so you're never going to get the second half of this effect. However, the first half will trigger, and most of your marches will benefit from additional rage. Right, the companion skill for exuberance, intense exuberance, which you get out of the pet store, will give your legion even more rage and heals them when casting exuberance. That's going to work, healing's always good, but Atheist, and especially Thea, can have really good healing and buff synergy. Finally, do you remember Spring Blades? Spring Blades has that bonus effect on it, which triggers whenever your legion gets passion. None of your heroes can trigger that, but the Golden Rock can. I think the Golden Rock is a good choice, especially for a legion led by Thea. Finally, we have the Night Rock. The Night Rock wants your heroes to do normal attack crit damage. Do any of your flying heroes do that? Yes, they do. Freygar boosts your normal attack crit by 60% for 7 seconds every time she casts her rage skill. Now you can get that number even higher with the Night Rock's talent skill, as well as a couple inexpensive generic talents. Normal attacks aren't really what you want to focus on with a Cav March, but in this world of limited choices, I do think the Night Rock is a strong option for your Freygar March. So what am I using with my marches? Well, I have a souped up Berserk Phaedrake that I use with my Ferondel March. That synergizes nicely both with Craig as the Deputy and the Oath of Stormpeak. My Thea March is using a Golden Rock, which goes nicely with her Spring Blades. And finally, my Atheist is using a Snowpeak Rock, really just because there's no better choice. Okay, so what do I think about Flying Cav in the game right now? Well, when the game was first released, we only had 3 flying heroes: Atheist, who is a mage, Craig, who has got that marksman tree, and Thea, who of course is a generalist. But things improved dramatically with Generation 2. Archers, and then Cav, and then finally mages each got a flying hero, and there was even a dedicated flying Cav pet that got released. But in G3 they pulled back support completely. During G3 they released 11 new heroes, and none of them flew. To rub salt into the wound, even the new pet family they released, the Manticore, feels like it should be able to fly, but of course it can't. As every ground-based playstyle got more and more support, flyers got left behind. About the only real support they gave to flying Cav players was the Wolf Hollow Horn, which is a real strong artifact, designed for ground commanders, but it can be used by flyers as well. But artifacts were always the one place we were doing fine in anyway. And you know what? I was fine with all that. After giving ample support to the flying stable in G2, I was 100% good with the devs taking a generation off. I assumed they would circle back around to providing support to flying marches come Generation 4. Well, I guess we'll see, but it doesn't look good so far. We have the new archers, and while they look strong, of course neither of them fly. The trend line seems to be they're moving away from the flying dimension completely, which I think is a regrettable decision. So what am I going to do? Well, this season I'm going to continue to play Eagles, at least at the start. My expectation is that towards the end of the season, the new Cav commanders will get announced. I expect neither of them are going to fly, and I expect I will change factions at that point. I hope I'm wrong, but only time will tell. Hey, congratulations. You've stuck around this video long enough to make it to the bonus section. Or if you just skipped ahead here, congratulations on working smarter and not harder. Alright, so I'm sitting in Home Kingdom, playing around, trying to figure out various ways to make my Air Force stronger, and from Valsa's Mad Science Lab, I've come up with the following experimental pairings. The pairings are still Frondel with Craig, Thea now with Atheist, using the Vigis of Sanctus, supported by a Golden Rock, and then Freygar with Bertrand, supported by a Night Rock. The idea behind these pairings is to sacrifice a little burst damage in exchange for better synergies. Alright, how is this going to work? Well, Thea is going all in on her buff and rage engine healing synergies. Because I now have her with Atheist and his 20% movement buff, I can get away from needing to rely on the PvP tree for movement speed skills and go full in on Thea's pick-me-up build from her support tree. Thea's talents, her skills, Atheist's skills, the shield, even the Golden Rock all have a ton of synergies between them. Now these synergies are sustained and defensive in nature, so it's not the first thing you think of when it comes to flying Cav. There's so many of them, they're so good, I'm trying to give it a shot. Alright, now on to Freygar and Bertrand. Because I've got 0 movement speed skills with them, I had to give them Sorlin's Blade. I picked up all the normal damage talents I could with Freygar's talents, and I'm going with a Night Rock that I still need to work on some, but the focus here is boosting on her normal attacks as much as I can. Finally, with Frondel and Craig, no real major changes here, but I did swap out the Oath of Stormpeat in exchange for the Wolf Howlhorn. Because my other two marches lost so much burst potential, I thought I should add it back here, and the crowd control effect is really nice as well. Now, if you're interested in how these pairings perform, check back on my channel often, as I'll be updating the channel regularly with the results of my KVK, a lot of War Pet news, Flying Cav news, and all my other Call of Dragons content. Hey, that's it, and thank you to everyone for stopping by. If you enjoyed this content or found it helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button. Remember, you can send me your war pets if you'd like me to take a look or review them, and I will be featuring the strongest war pets in the game right here on this channel. Look for more details in the description below, and until next time, stay classy, Belleron.